Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford, and in this video, what I'm going to do is take the text of Hávamál from the Poetic Edda, stanza 77, probably the best known quotation from Old Norse literature, and project it backwards, showing you what this would look like at different stages of the Old Norse language as you go backwards, and then also at one point in a related language that I know pretty well, Gothic, because people I've been pretty interested in that on this channel historically. Originally I did something like this about 3 years ago because people kept asking for this stanza in Elder Futhark runes, when in fact it would be the Proto-Norse language that was written in Elder Futhark runes. Old Norse is written in Younger Futhark. So in my Proto-Norse versus Old Norse videos, where I first presented the Proto-Norse text in Elder Futhark runes, here I'm not interested in the runic writing as such, but only in the different forms the language takes as we project backwards. So here is that text as I would reconstruct it in Proto-Norse. In other words, in the first half of the first millennium AD, the language as it would have been written in Elder Futhark. Dauyith fehu, dauyan freandis, dauyith selvas samo. Eka white ainano thatana aldragen dauyith, domas umbi dauthano huariano. A few things to note. In the language we know as Old Norse, the second person singular and the third person singular have fallen together, and they use the second person singular ending, which in Proto-Norse would have been dauyis, you die. So in the Proto-Norse stage, we still have this distinct third person singular form, dauyith. We would expect this to become Old Norse deyr, but we never actually see that in our Old Icelandic literature. That form is long gone by then. But of course, this is the form that's cognate with the th in Older English, like he dieth, right? He starveth. That ending that we're familiar with from, say, the King James Bible or Shakespeare. Another thing to note is the aldragen there. I am taking that as, you know, an age, but it doesn't yet have negative sense in itself. Old Norse aldri, which is from this, means never, but that's an example of Jespersen's law, where something that used to not have negative meaning has come to have negative meaning without the negative in it anymore. And Proto-Norse, I'm assuming it still needs the original negative ne there. And also, as far as the exact form here, I mean, I'm using eka, which is a pretty early Proto-Norse form. We already see ek in Western Scandinavia in the Elder Futhark period, just like we already see yak, the so-called broken form of this, in the East Norse area and the Proto-Norse period too. And of course, that ek is ancestral to Old Norse ek, modern Icelandic ye, with the ya there is a secondary development, modern Norwegian New Norse egg, and then that yak is ancestral to, for example, Swedish ja, Danish or Norwegian bokmål jeg. All right. Come back here in just a moment after a quick word from my friends and partners at Grimfrost to look at what this text would have looked like in the roughly contemporary Gothic language, which we know from Ulfala's Bible, and then in one much earlier stage, the Proto-Indo-European language. Alright, since I've been talking about Gothic on this channel more, because I realize there's not many people talking about it who know what they're talking about online, let me do this in Gothic. Gadauhthnith fahu, gadauhthnand frions, gadauhthnith silva samaliko. Ik white anana, sa I negdauthnyth, domps anadauthana hwariano. That would be cognate with the Old Norse forms, although really, if we want to use language that's more familiar from Wolfila's Bible, I would probably say stoa dauthis hwarizu, or stoa dauthis hwizu. So there's some notable differences here from Proto-Norse or Old Norse. We have lots of prefixes in Gothic, which are lost in Old Norse or occasionally just preserved as fossil remnants, vestiges. One of the most important is that ga, which is of course cognate with the g that you see in lots of German past participles and some collectives. That form of die is not exactly cognate with Old Norse. This has become dead, literally dauth non, not exactly cognate with the Old Norse deyja, which would come from a same root but a different verb formant at the end. Gothic forms relatives differently from any stage of Proto-Norse or Old Norse. We've got this relativizing suffix e, spelled ei in Romanized Gothic that you see in that line 5. And then for every, Old Norse can use hwer, which is the interrogative who, as also being an indefinite, like anyone. It can also mean everyone. Gothic doesn't do that, but it does have it does form something from the same root, but then it adds this oh or at the end. You can also add that oh or at the end of the regular hwer, who cognate form. So that's why you've got those competing hwano, hwariano, hwizuch, hwarezuch forms there. Of course, Gothic is not written natively, if you will, by Wolfila. In the Roman alphabet, we have some runic inscriptions in it, but Wolfila, or someone, devised a alphabet that's mostly Greek-derived, but has some runic influence too. Here, I've represented this for ease of reading in the Roman alphabet. What would this text have been called in Gothic? Hard to say. Potentially something like Hauchens Warda, the high ones words. That word mol in Old Norse means speech, but in Gothic, mothel, the cognate, I think is only attested as meaning meal, which is of course also the meaning of the English cognate. By the way, also in reading this Gothic text, I have distinguished between monophthongal and diphthongal AI and AU based on their etymology. Not everyone reading Gothic is going to do that, but it's a little bit more natural to someone who's more accustomed to Old Norse, where those monophthongs and diphthongs have different realizations, as they might not have in Wolfila Gothic. We really don't know, because of course there's no living language descended from Gothic we can triangulate from to figure out how exactly they were pronouncing things. We just have to kind of base it on what we know about Greek at the period, which the spelling of Gothic is based on that. All right, here's my most out there version of this. Let's go all the way back to Proto-Indo-European. Here I'm going to use a few less cognates, use a little bit more stuff based on how it might be said in Homeric Greek or Vedic Sanskrit, just because some of the Germanic words, especially, like what's a good example? That word for judgment, domr, there's a way better word for this concept in Proto-Indo-European that just, there's no good cognate in a Germanic language. Teheu heti pekiu, teheu hanti prehontes, teheu heti swe somon. Ekja Whitehair, Hainan, Hjosone Teheu Heti, Klewas, Quesio, Murtwasio. So here you can see Fehu. If you reverse that Grimm's Law, you get Pecu, which is almost exactly the Latin cognate, means money or cattle. The friend word, I'm assuming you could have something like that in Proto-Indo-European. This root having something to do with love, right? Your friends, your relatives, originally, the ones that you love. Proto-Indo-European, we can't exactly say how it forms relatives here. I'm doing this hios, so is kind of based on like a Homeric way of doing this, with that Proto-Indo-European hios relative, and then the so pronoun for that, which is probably obligatory at this point. It's certainly obligatory in Old Norse. But who knows exactly how this would have been done in Proto-Indo-European. Kleawas is, of course, a wonderful word for imperishable fame in Proto-Indo-European that we construct on the basis of Homeric kleos, Sanskrit shravas, as used in old poetry in those languages. That is obviously a much more plausible word in Proto-Indo-European. Well, I hope that was a somewhat fun exercise for you, and thank you to Patreon, as always, for your support. For now, from beautiful Wyoming, I'm wishing you all the best.